The yeas are 94, the nays are 1. The 60-vote threshold having been achieved, the bill as amended is passed.
By passing this bill, we'll send a message to the country that should be all too obvious by now. Hate crimes will not be tolerated, and federal law enforcement will do everything in its power to detect, deter, and if necessary, prosecute crimes to the full extent of the law.
And this bill tells the AAPI community, who are seen as the other, who are often asked, where are you from, really? And I've had that happen to me while wearing the uniform of this nation with her flag on my shoulder. This tells the AAPI community, we see you, and we will stand with you, and we will protect you.
The kind of action that we've seen today will enable more reporting, which is more prosecution and more deterrent.
This bill, I would say, just as important as the substance of the bill and what we hope to do by gathering the kind of data we need, that as important as the content and substance of the bill is the message of this bill, that we in the Senate are going to stand with our AAPI community, and indeed any community that is discriminated against on the basis of race or any of the categories that you and I can think of. So in a really strong vote, 94-1. Wow, when was the last time we saw that?